Okay, hello everybody. I just got over a cold, so my voice might start to give out a little bit, but that's okay. I'll just drink a drink of water as needed or whatever. Okay, so I just want to start by thanking Sue, Carol, and Mahela, and everyone at the New Writers Group, but particularly for entrusting the entries for ZineWest this year once again to my judgment. It's a task I don't take lightly, not least because I know how hard it is for writers to put their work out into the world, particularly in the foreknowledge that it's going to land on the desk of some self-proclaimed authority who's going to rank order it in a necessarily subjective fashion. I know you've spread your dreams at my feet, so I try to tread softly on your dreams. The first work I read this year was Airflow, which is 2 quatrains on the glacial drip of Sydney traffic westbound on the M5, where time loses its blue truth and the stars fall by one, and home becomes a mindless fuzz, too tired, too hungry, and so very relatable to anybody who travels the motorways of this God-forsaken city through the godless tunnels and the motorways. And where are we going anyway? Into a home like the one in focus, where there's this shadowy beast running around distracting a gloved surgeon from the task of excising excreted philosophies in the arterial burrows amidst scalpels, organic veggies, discarded potato peelers, and a body twitching as if to music. And Katie will hang up her phone in this work of the macabre as her consciousness expands. And meanwhile, in a bedroom somewhere nearby, there's a chance encounter between 2 bank queue crossed lovers astonished at their connectedness, their commonalities. They both got Jack Russells. They both shop at Green Valley Plaza. They run twice a week down the same mirrored streets, but then their encounter kind of dissolves, and the volcanic force of unstoppable emotion erupting between them fades, because it's just a dream, just an insubstantial pageant fade. And worse, so much worse for the poet, it's all based on some movie we watched yesterday. And things could be worse, you know, it's true. Yesterday, for instance, might lose all meaning, as calendars and schedules and dates do in the post-apocalyptic world of the day the technology stopped. Because those temporal signs, the resigned narrator tells us, you know, they belong to the before. In this new world, planes fall from the sky, and the charred wreckage lies on the earth, and savagery, foretold by novelistic doomsayers, erupts in makeshift crucifixions, and the world of buzzing, bleeding, ringing, modern life surrenders to a dark silence. But the opposite condition fills the prose of Western arguments, because here the buzz of modern life is alive and well, and we're taken on a road trip through Bonnyrigg Heights, my neighbourhood as it happens. And it's lit with irony on a summer wind, and it's written in demotic, Westy vernacular, where what's up is nothing much, just assignments and shit, but don't worry bro, because Cow Pasture Road has 2 Hungry Jacks. That's what HJ stands for, if you didn't realise. So you can get a Whopper from one, and a Sunday from the second. And Danny will be waiting out the front of Damo's place, and he'll say, about time he's got here, as some kind of psalm. And perhaps one of these young men, you know, Damo or whatever, grows up to become the fine-minded man with a soft, peaceful presence who prefers to spend his time on rooftops playing with the pigeons in the plan. If so, his fate is a strange but fortunate one, for so loved is he by Mariam, his wife, that she defends his honour against accusers in too much makeup, who scoff at his eccentricities. And when he reveals to her, his wife that is, his grand designs to ascend up into some higher plane, she's selfless beyond measure, and through her trembling tears and kisses. A less fortunate life is on display in Just a Kid. But the relationship at the centre of this story is no less tender. It's a series of vignettes about a boy behind bars, so to speak, and the one woman who's able to bring a smile out from behind his midnight mask. He opens for her through fresh aches and crisscross and cuts over old wounds in his steel-bolted room of incarceration against these dull kind of grey walls, green walls. And his temper becomes gentle like the soft turning pages of a novel caught in a spring breeze. Whatever the boy's sins might be, they no doubt pale in comparison to the barbarous designs laid bare in Murder in a Westfield Parramatta cinema, which is an archly antisocial decrying of the loss of common decencies and the unjust overdevelopment of this town we're in, where this session of Murder in the Orient Express, finds our reclusive protagonist devising an action plan in which a burping teenage girl, an inconsiderate businessman, 3 smartphone-fixated millennials and a gang of acrobatic punks are all extinguished in the dark space of a cinema on a Saturday afternoon. It's very harsh. But a daydream leaves no victims in its wake. But the detective Arcadia, from the reassignment, it finds her first day on the job involves the kind of crime that does leave victims behind. And with her gruff new partner, Detective Arcadia, tours the desolate terrain beyond the police tape, where the tendrils of smoke are rising around a bedroom and the incinerated remains of a body lies curled and charred on the metal framework of a bed. It's a dark kind of discovery, but what she finds in the tin under the bed is somehow even more fearsome than this grisly scene. At first you might think that the bushy greens and the clear river flowing through the park in the tree might make for an innocent antidote to that kind of macabre thing. There's these children in jungle gyms and girls singing and skipping through the fields, and there's a gentle breeze rippling through the leaves, and the grass seems to move to the tune of inaudible music. But hanging over this haven is this gloomy atmosphere. It's one that might just give birth to the kind of twist that young Stephen King became notorious for. Whatever the fate of the boy in the tree, the elegiac poetry of Just One Time might have been written to his disappearance. We see his bandy legs and his tousled hair. He's a little beanpole of a boy. He's on a sunny picnic. He's got his father's smile and his grandfather's walk and a barely perceptible sprinkling of mother. And all this is just snatched away by God's white-veiled brides. And the mourning of his absence sits heavy on the heart for 16 years. To say just once I love you might set this weight free. And the flood comes in the night of the poem fresh, reminding us that all things will pass, and the land will smell right again in the morning, and the birds will dance in the soft currents, and gather their claws on balcony rails, waiting to be fed by human hands, and the sun will break through the line of grey against the sky, and even if we want to go back to bed, the cats will keep you up. And that gives you at least some reason to be awake. But what you do with the day is up to us. We may, for instance, find ourselves thinking of TV tropes in a public toilet while the woman next to us vomits so explosively that our arms get smattered in green brown globs. And we might even leave the stall unfinished and suffer the slings and arrows of a growling bow. That's the fate of the anxious narrator in the suburban horror of using the toilet. But if you prefer the second person and an adventure less scatological, then there's a place for you in Moon, Peace Between. There you're going to be drawn into this surreal gravitation of some metal structures on a hill. Their octagonal legs holding a half sphere balanced on a beam. And they'll take you to the Rocky Mountains and you'll run down those misted peaks from boulder to boulder beneath the watchful eye of a blue and brown globe covered in wisps of white cloud, gleaming in the darkness above with their logic being that of a dream. And if you fall and fall into webs of meaning, you might end up back where you began. The offering in the masterpiece is made of blood, agony and terror. It's the slender, neat cutting of the poet on a page. His work is a gift for the reader, like cats who maul with their mouths and drop vivisected rats unsolicited on your doorstep for your freckled face to wince at in disgust. Or maybe you prefer the thought of a poem as like a snowflake fallen without sound around the simple elegance of children brushing at the plump bodies of snowmen as a white winter presses itself onto the lawns and the yards in silence. steadiness. And somewhere distant to that, there's a rider on a bike passing through the closing ceremony and seeing the headstones as these kind of mute antidotes to any nearby Olympic spirit, where rather than triumph and glory and parades and all that sort of stuff, the participants are just missed and loved and in memory of. And here's the grim ground of dried wreaths and plastic flowers, and there's no triumph or glory, only complete equality of the covered potter's earth. And maybe it's true that death is the end, but there's still a cry coming from the cracks and crevices in the depths. For example, the roar of ancient gods and the voices of long dead ancestors around the heads of children wreathed with baleful ghosts of grief and sorrow, while 1,000 gigatons of CO2 promise energy to 300 million people. And you have protesters painted in demon masks growling into microphones, and then you have morphine addicts doubled over in their yearning, all part of some unspeakable longing in the haunted ontologies of desire. Desire, too, is the chasm. I say chasm, but it's probably chasm, I think. That separate the love that's turned to fear in unbearable tunes, where the backs beat a broken umbrella rhythm between light and dark, and the icy wind sees the words fresh out of the mouth of our narrator. There's a bitter, mournful cry over the great expanse of nothingness and its existential power. It was that you begins its series of eclectic visions with a growl and thaw, and the sighting of contrail lingering a line from Frankfurt to Hong Kong, and a genealogy of meals from pan-fried fish to week's leftovers taken from a fridge that needs a bit of cleaning. And then we're on the road to Bell's Line, Barangarang, watched by sad men on boisterous motorbikes, while the cabin crew are chewing and chanting, and a plane descends and meaning slips out of time. Was that you? Or, maybe a better question is, who the heck is that on my left? And who was the bugger on the right? And who had a motorbike that gave him scars? And we don't know. Charming verse reflections in the poem photos are trying to persuade us. All you can do is look at the images that sit on the walls in frames both wide and tall, and in lines delivered in rhyming couplets and a ballad rhythm. And since we're in this poetic mode of memory, let's consider the 20-year affair. It's an old Shakespearean rag delivered in two parts. The curtains open on transgression in the park, and later by the bottles of sherry on the floor, while some commitment snores in the farther room, or cries in Queensland at a funeral while the actors stumble giddy in their drunk delight, and the curtains come down, the fates are reversed, and the day smiles on solemn mountains. That's the same light that shakes across the blue sea and the saltwater pools in Shoalcraft, where our curious narrator is compelled to offer coffee to a shabby mute who emerges from behind the change rooms in the early morning. He's there come rain, hail, or volcanic ash, and our witness watches this hunched and callous stranger sculpt in the dark, his gnarled hands working through the hours until at last he leaves a masterpiece on the wet shoals. A world away, Taylor hits her children with the tails of her broom, and their feet slap the stony path. The smell of manure and burning wood, the sight of chicken feathers and rolled carpet by the door, an engine roars, and there's fear in the streets, because the war within is set in a rich, vivid telling of life lived in a dangerous place, where Taylor grows tired as dust, though she can read the road to paradise in the lines of your palm. To get old, though, the poem Extrude preaches in a kind of mordant tone, is a fault most repellent. You get reliant on death, and you see crinkles in the walls, and the human stew of catabolic cannibalism fill the gap of wheelchairs. And you watch pale beds, and you hear again and again this odd refrain, I think I'm kind of in love with you, revolve around the soul, and it gets its grit and grain, and something like a curse. Now, these discreet voices speaking endlessly, is slipping through the fingers of incandescence in the lines of sun-kissed to offer another brighter side of love. And here it's the ineffable face of beauty itself, a blind, rousing wave of presence and pull, a flood and a burst of meaning that can save you, but you can't touch. Then you get some comic relief. In, I guess you call us Westies. There's this panel chart of life examined in prose and illustrations, and we follow this one woman's adventures in inequality, inequity, and all its merry manifestations, from early embarrassment at living in the wrong suburb to the foreign sound of your own laughter when you cross the bridge heading north. And only those people that call themselves Westies understand. But as the poet says, you know what, it's all relative, I guess. Like winter without oranges, which is a sure sign that Bar has not been out to tend his aloe vera. He hasn't performed his trimming and tucking in the yard, but has instead spent his days a patient in a hospital bed. And Ma and our narrator wage a war of faith and duty with their insecticides and their shears, and sit vigil in their folding chairs, drinking in the hopeful light besides the winter melons in a bush barely burned. A father's crying out in Grandma's lament, saying, "Mother, leave those children be," while Nenek stews in a ridiculous rages. Their anger is swift and precise as a samurai. She's wielding a rattan cane, and she knocks the heads of her wild offspring. But they're not so naughty, these children. They're not like the rogues in Bad Work Plus Honour who they kind of romance each other over their devices. They devise a strange scheme to interject their shackled lives with a quick dose of reported chaos that leaves the reader dangling in disquiet amidst a scene of yurts and dusty falcons in black beanies pulled over ears, while the passenger door creaks like a ghost. And the taxi driver back in town is asking where the poet wants to go. Let's start again. Where am I? What side of the tracks? Prose poem's dialectic on the divide of east and west is full of fire and brimstone for the fouler features of those places where land meets sea and ocean. Where the millionaires live, the driver says. Share, if you agree, is the last commandment. It's a tightly worded imagining of modern life where your friends are kind of like swarms of flies in judgment, as if we're all linked by some great panopticon in the clouds where we dilute our ugly thoughts and dream of ways to share our humility for all the world to see. Alright, so I'll conclude now with some words from Renata Adler. She says that writer's right is meant to be self-evident. People like to say it. I find it is hardly ever true. Writers drink, writers rant, writers phone, writers sleep. I have met very few writers who write at all, she says. I think that this is true. So I want to congratulate you all for being the very, very few who do. And to say that I think the world's a better place for it. So give yourself a round of applause.